Good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of Drunk Agile. As always, with me is my partner in crime,
Prateek
Singh. My name is Daniel Vacanti. We start off every night with the usual festivities. Prateek, would you like to lead us off? What are you enjoying tonight?
So I'm back to the Akantashan Olorosa cast. This is the one that you bottle yourself, 59.9%. Yeah, clearly the virus is affecting us, and we'll have to do multiple repeats here.
Yeah, I am going to be kind of doing the walk of shame myself a little bit tonight. This is, I don't know if I'm happy about this or not. But by the way, you can leave in the comments what a good friend I am to Prateek. I bottled that myself. I flew it all the way from Scotland and I gave it to him. And what does he give me?
Here's proof of it. Here's the UK stamp.
Yeah. What I have tonight, like I said, this is my walk of shame. What I have tonight is actually a blend. It's a 20-year-old blend. I know. But this is the stuff, as you can see, this is the stuff that I normally do my marinades with. And I don't have quite enough left to do another marinade. So I figured, what the heck? Because we're in the age of coronavirus, COVID-19, and because we can't replenish our stocks, what the heck? Let's just
might as well. Yeah.
Actually, I'm just going to kill it.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
This is going to be a good talk tonight. I probably should use that one for Monte Carlo or something. Yeah. So this is only 46%, so I should be okay. So cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Tonight, again, assuming that we are doing these in order, who knows what order we're going to publish these things in. But tonight we thought we'd take maybe just I was going to say a little step back, but I think we're going to take actually a very big step back.
Yeah.
And we're going to go it's huge. Everybody says so. And we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of Kanban anyway. And kind of talk about the basics and fundamentals, to kind of talk about our philosophy, that we use as we approach either implementing Kanban ourselves or coaching other teams to implement Kanban, or whatever. Because I think a lot of the discussions, probably a lot of the future discussions that we will have, and actually a lot of discussions we've had in the past, are really based on this fundamental philosophy. I think over the years, Kanban has been made to be much more complicated than it needs to be. And as we were talking, right before we started this call, so many people have conflated the Kanban method and Kanban. And I don't want to talk about Kanban method because I don't want to give that any press, right? Because it's just, well, I was going to say that's for over drinks. I guess we are doing drinks. But we just to be clear, when we talk tonight, we're talking more pure Kanban, whatever that is. We are not talking something known as the Kanban method. So I don't know, Prateek, do you have anything to say to kind of introduce when we talk about the fundamentals of what Kanban is? What comes to mind? What are you thinking?
Well, it's kind of funny because when we say, I know you've already said this 3 times already, right? That Kanban and Kanban method are 2 very different things. We're talking Kanban, which is much simpler than what's commonly taught. And whenever anyone thinks Kanban, the first thing that usually comes to people's mind is this board with stickies on it. And while that's a facet of Kanban, that's probably the beginning point of Kanban, but there's a little more to it, not a lot more to it, but there is a little more to it that we will talk about today.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I like to say this, and it is a bit provocative, but I'll say it anyway. I think, Kanban, as it is unfortunately commonly understood now, is really a perversion of what it was meant to be. And I really do mean, perversion in its most fundamental sense. Back when we first started doing Kanban at Corbis in 2006, 2007, and what it is now, in my eyes anyway, are just really kind of unrecognizable. So let's talk a little bit about that. When we say kind of pure Kanban, what do we mean? So, Prateek, you've been doing Agile training and coaching now for what, 6, 7, 8, whatever years it is now. what's your philosophy? Where do you start? What do you do? How do you think? What get us going here?
For me, what first thing I want to figure out is what's our current process? How does a bill become a law, right? How do we take something that is a request or whatever and work it through our things and produce something out of it? Let's first figure out what that is. Then, and I'm probably going to give away the punchline here, but figure out what that is. Step two, let's actually actively manage that thing and operate it. And then finally, based on the things that are coming out of actively managing it, all the data and everything we're collecting, let's improve that. So let's build this thing out, manage it, and improve it. To me, at the base level, that is what operating a successful process is.
And I agree. It really is those three fundamental steps. And kind of in the interest of further interest of full disclosure, this was this week. It'll either be this week or next week. So we are we're mid-July to
mid-July
2020.
15th. So
yeah. We just published a community of Kanban of Kanban practitioners. Let's just call them Kanban practitioners. Got together, and we've written and published a Kanban guide, and it's out there on kanbanguides.org. So if you just go to Kanban Guides, all one word, kanbanguides.org, you can see the latest version of what we're calling the Kanban guide. And in that guide is exactly what Prateek just mentioned, right? There are just three fundamental practices, if you will, three fundamental steps to doing Kanban. You have to define your workflow. You have to actively manage items in that workflow, and you have to improve that workflow. If you're doing those three things, you're doing Kanban. Doesn't matter. I mean, yes, you can layer other stuff on top of it. You know, you can work with Scrum, you can work with Safe, you can do all these other things that you want to, but as long as you're doing those three fundamental things, you're doing Kanban. So for the purposes of this call, though, we're not going to talk about all of those all at once. We'll obviously stretch this out over several episodes. But for the purposes of this talk, we'll start with that first thing. You know, what does it mean really to define your workflow? And you know, this is to clear up what I would argue is a misconception about Kanban. Prateek, would you say that in defining that workflow, that you absolutely have to start with where you are now? I mean, that's how you start whenever you're defining that process that you were talking about before?
Yeah, so
you just have to start with where you're working are right now, right? Isn't that what you do?
So absolutely not. But at the same time, you have to start with understanding where you are. You don't have to start with so I think people conflate the two things. Just because you're supposed to understand where you are doesn't mean you have to start with exactly what you do. Essentially, understand all the steps in your process doesn't mean that your process has to be exactly where it is right now.
Yeah.
I think those two things get conflated quite a bit.
Yeah, and so kind of talk through, because we were talking about this before. You and I, we've done several trainings, co-trainings over the years. When we work with teams, I mean, what's kind of been your preferred approach to getting them up and running with Kanban? How do you do that?
I think actually, and it's kind of funny you mentioned that. I think we did this, I think about 30 times.
Yeah,
30
maybe more
times.
Yeah,
we would do we would do a standard Kanban training, kind of get people familiar with the terms, what we're looking for, play the penny game, get them understanding WIP and all that stuff. But once they've understood that stuff, literally, and like that whiteboard back there, we'll literally take a blank whiteboard and start writing down all the things that happen to a work item. Like someone's written requirements. We have done a kickoff so that everyone involved understands the requirements. We have written code. We have tested the code. We have written unit tests. We have written automation for testing. It has run through our CI. It has been merged into the trunk. It has been delivered to the customer. Whatever happens to that work item, we would take the team and just write it all down. Gather the team around the whiteboard and just write down everything that happens to the item. Usually, once we have all that, and that's what I meant by saying, you need to know where you are. You don't need to start where you are, but that putting everything down on the whiteboard is understanding where you are right now. What are the things we do right now? Then we say, okay, in your ideal system, in the system that suits, as we understand things right now, suits this team the best, what are the steps in the workflow, and which of these individual items that we just wrote down fall into each step? What is the exit criteria that they form? So the team might say, we have 3 steps. We have coding, we have analyzing, coding, testing. We'll essentially take those 20 things that they came up with, that the list from the whiteboard, and say, okay, where does this one go? Where does this one go? And they'll put that out there. What they might end up with might look completely different from what they do right now.
Yep.
It might look absolutely alien to someone who missed the training and walked in.
Yeah. And that's a very, very important point to emphasize, I think, because as we're leading them through that exercise, and a lot of you people out there might recognize it's a very, very, very crude value stream mapping exercise. I don't want to call it value stream mapping because it absolutely isn't. It absolutely is not value stream mapping, but it's kind of a second cousin to value stream mapping.
Like a backwards value
stream.
Yeah.
Well, this is. I was going to say something about West Virginia, but then I figured we probably shouldn't say that. With all respect to West Virginians. But in terms of setting context for our listeners, when we start that exercise, we make it very clear. It's like, forget about what you're doing in Jira right now, because you have to imagine these are fairly mature teams. They're teams that have existed for years, if not decades. Right. People have been working in this context for many years. They've been through Scrum training. They've been using Jira for years or whatever. So they're it's not like they're agile newbies, right? They know what they're doing. And we actually sit them down and we say, okay, forget about how Jira is used right now. Forget about how some random person in the past told you should be working. As a team, let's get together and let's decide, what is our working agreement as a group? Right? Everybody has a say in this thing. As a group, how do we want to work? Right, and let's literally build that from scratch. Take a blank whiteboard, like you said. Take a blank whiteboard and let's build it from scratch. Everybody has a say, and what comes out is something that everybody can get behind.
Yeah, there literally have been a couple of teams where we've done this, and they, like, all the things that I was listing out, writing requirements, reviewing requirements, kicking off story, writing code. They have literally before coming to training, had columns for each of those steps, or each of those mini steps. And walking out of the training, they went out with a board that had a total of 4 columns, because each of those things became essentially exit criteria for each of those columns. It's because the misnomer for me is start where you are. It's not start where you are, it's understand where you are, and then figure out where to start.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so what's potentially challenging but ultimately rewarding from this is more often than not, we come up with the design, because and again, all these teams are probably using a tool like Jira, right? But more often than not, we'll come up with a design that Jira just can't handle. Right. I mean, it's just due to the limitations of how Jira does things, how you can set up columns, how you can set up work in progress limits, whatever. Due to the limitations of Jira, the design that we come up with doesn't necessarily match Jira. And so there is an additional step, there is additional overhead of kind of mapping that process to Jira. But like I said, it's really kind of well worth it, because what people understand now is more, how do we want to work independent of what Jira says we can do? With Steve Reed, our enabler, I guess.
I don't know.
First one's on me.
He wants that.
Maybe he doesn't.
I don't know if he wants that credit.
See, Steve Reed is a long time supporter of the Kanban community, going back to the very beginning, 2009. I mean, the very first conference that was ever put on was because of Steve Reed, and most of the Kanban conferences after that were because of the diligence of Steve Reed. Anyway, one of the things that Steve Reed loves to say is, you're only limited by your imagination. when you're thinking about how to visualize your work, how a team wants to work, you're only limited by your imagination. Unfortunately, once you start to put that into Jira, then you're limited by Jira.
Then you're limited by Jira.
Yeah, but that's okay, because like I said, the team now has a fundamental understanding. And I don't know if you want to talk about what the specific team that you ran, you didn't allow yourself to be handcuffed by Jira. Can you talk about how you handled it?
We had Jira was a tracking system, so we still track things through Jira. But for me, the Jira was too limiting with the things I wanted to do, so I still ran a physical board. Our team still used a physical board every day for stand up. We limited our WIP using a physical board. We visualized everything using a physical board. We had a copy of that physical board in Jira, but we ran using the physical board. Jira was more to make sure that, it took 5 seconds to sync the two boards, was to make sure that we could get metrics out of it. But at the end of the day, each person on the team, when the question was, what do I pick up next? We looked at the physical board, or I just got done with that thing. We went and moved the card on the physical board. And and we literally had our policies stuck up on the physical board, all that exit criteria we just talked about. So with that, the result of that exercise, when you come up with this board, as we said, you can visualize it, whether you want to do it physically or in Jira or Rally or whichever system you use. The probably the more important result is each person on the team now understands what our workflow is bought into it, and understands our policies that are used in that workflow explicitly. We understand it in the same manner, hopefully.
Right. So and just to clarify, because you've mentioned a couple things that kind of go into that visualization, but I want to make sure that people really understand what we're talking about. You mentioned exit criteria. We've talked a little bit about limiting work in progress. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit more about, what exit criteria are? Can you talk about maybe some other things that go into the visualization other than exit criteria and limiting work in progress? Like that?
So the exit criteria, for the way we usually define it, is let's say your board has 3 columns: analysis, coding, testing, and then everything is done. Exit criteria is for example, for coding would be things that need to happen in that coding column before a ticket can move forward. So things like, I've actually written the code, I've checked the code in.
God forbid.
Yeah, my CI is green. I have written unit tests that cover that code. Someone else has come in and reviewed the code to make sure this is not going to blow everything up down the road. If all those things have happened, then I know that I can actually move this card forward into testing, and it can be pulled, well, given that there is WIP available to pull it in testing. But those explicit criteria, those explicit items that need to get taken care of before we can move something forward is exit criteria. There are people also like to define entry criteria. I sometimes find that to be a little superfluous. I think exit is enough. But as long as we know all the things that need to happen before something can move forward, that is exit criteria. The one thing that I would love to mention about exit criteria is it's exit criteria. It doesn't mean that an exit criteria of a downstream column cannot start being satisfied already. It's exit criteria. Limiting WIP, we've talked a bunch about it. On a physical board, we would literally have a sticky that we would stick on top of the board and write the number on it. That's another beautiful thing with a physical board, is you can stand in front of it and go, that number looks really high. Let's just take that sticky off and put another one on. It's really easy to get the team around it. The other really cool thing, which Jira does not let us do, and we were able to do on the board, was having multiple assignees on the same ticket, or multiple people working on the same ticket. We used to have avatars for every person on the team. Someone joined the team, they had to come up with an avatar, and if they did not, then one was assigned to them. And so
that was the only time it was okay to assign something to somebody, right?
Yeah.
The avatar.
Yeah. So and literally we had those stuck on to the tickets that people were working on. Just you could have up to 4 or 5 whatever number of people on the same ticket, because people were swarming on things or pairing on things. Jira does not make it that easy to do that.
Yep. Yep.
Many tools don't. So,
and there are a whole bunch of other things you need to take into consideration. Policies around blockers. We spend a good amount of time
right.
in our trainings talking about, what does it even mean for something to be blocked, and then once it does get blocked, how is our system going to handle it? Again, that's something that the team needs to get together and decide how we want to handle blockers. There's things like service level expectation. How long should it be? Should it take items to get through the process? And what do we do if it looks like something's taking too long? There's just so many dimensions to, in the Kanban guide, what we're calling your definition of workflow and how you visualize your workflow. Far too many things to go in, on this particular chat right now, but it's making those basic fundamental decisions. Again, we can't stress this enough, again, as a team, was our team shared understanding of how we're going to do this. That is just so crucially important.
And I think the point that I want to repeat there is defining your workflow does not just mean defining the steps in your workflow. It also means defining the rules that we play our game by, the rules around that workflow, the WIP limits you talked about, the blocker policies, the SLE, how long do we expect things to take?
Yep. That's going to be hugely important. I am sure at some points down the line, we are going to be talking about variation and variability, especially Deming. And I forget I think he changed the percentage over time, but Deming used to say with 90%, 95%, 90 whatever percent of the variability in the process, a variability that you see is actually because of the process. It's not due to, a poor performing individual necessarily. It's the system, right? It's the system, stupid. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck for understanding variability. And that's why it's so important, as you were saying, to understand what are those rules, because most of the variability we suffer from is self-inflicted. Right? There's stupid rules that we have in terms of, like you said, maybe superfluous reviews or overly onerous code review process or sign-offs from people who don't need to sign.
Expedite process.
Or expedites, yeah. I'm glad you went there. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm glad you went there. But, I mean, yeah, most of that variability, but it comes down to that fundamental understanding of how we want to work. Because if the team has that understanding, now we've at least got a shot at controlling that variability. Right? If we don't understand that stuff, then forget it, right? But at least now we've got a shot. Doesn't guarantee it, but at least now we got a shot at it. So, I don't know. Is there anything else? Because we're kind of starting to border on
the second part of it.
Yeah, the second part of it. So I don't know. Is there anything else that we need to cover for
defining? Yeah, but that's. I don't think there is much. It's essentially those two parts, right? Actually, what are the steps and what are the rules that we have around the steps that we follow to get something done? And I know you don't like it as much when I say this, but doing done is probably absolutely apt for what your workflow is, and in my opinion is probably the perfect workflow for everybody. But again, you need to know all the rules around doing it. Those rules are probably even more, the rules for your workflow are probably even more important than the steps in your workflow.
Yep. And for the record, I don't necessarily disagree with doing, and done. But I think, believe it or not, most people would think a to-do, doing, and done, a very simple workflow is for an immature team. I would argue to-do, doing, and done is actually for a very mature team who really understands what they're doing. That's when you can get away with
if you really want to challenge your team to move up in maturity, just slap a to-do, doing, done workflow on it.
That might be a good candidate for a future talk. Is what are some guidelines in terms of visualizing? When do we use to do, doing, and done? When do we have buffer columns? When do we have sub columns? When do we use swim lanes and things like that? I don't know if anybody's really interested in any of that stuff, but I'm sure we could probably fill the talk on our philosophy with that. Probably.
That would be a good one. Yeah, mention it.
Okay. Well, again, we should probably capture it on the magic whiteboard, which whenever we write something down, we always lose what we've written
It
down.
gets
So we never know
erased.
what
I
we're
don't know
talking about.
how.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think
So
it's
I don't
Nisha.
know. I was gonna say, is
By
Nisha
the
still
way,
there? Oh, there's Nisha. Yeah, the star of the show.
She's decided that she's taking a nap in a different position today.
It's too damn loud. Okay, well, so as is customary, I will give you the last word. Is there anything you'd like to say to kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, nothing we haven't said before. Just it's about understanding where you are and then deciding where you want to go, and making that explicit, visible, and so that the entire team understands what a workflow is and how we operate it.
Yep.
That's step one.
Okay. So I lied. I'll take the last word then. I think I do this every time. I think I do.
Yeah, we know.
To me, the emphasis of this show is, or this particular episode, is not only what you said, but don't necessarily get hung up on this. But you have to start, if you're doing Kanban, you have to start with where you are now. Every Kanban implementation that I've been a part of, going back to the very first one, we've never, ever done the start with where you are now and evolve incrementally. It's just never. If you do that and that works for you, I think that's great. Continue to do it. I mean, who am I to say that that's not working for you? But what my message to most everybody else is, don't feel like that's what you have to do. If you feel like starting with a blank whiteboard and kind of, this radical change, because by the way, limiting work in progress on a team that's never limited work in progress before is radical change. I don't care what anybody tells you. That's radical, revolutionary change. That's not evolutionary. But if you feel that's what you need to do, then by all means do it. And don't worry about, well, God, is this Kanban? Is this not Kanban? Who cares? If it works for you, do it, and just go off and be awesome. So with that, we will say, I have to be honest with you. I'm struggling to get through my blend. I'm really struggling.
You don't have anything to marinate?
This is, yeah, I know. With this much, with like half an ounce of whiskey, yeah, go marinate like a crumb of chicken or something. I don't know. I don't
One
know.
strip of bacon.
I don't want to say I'm going to pour this out, but man, really struggling. Hopefully, we'll get back to something a bit more pure. I guess it was a bit of a contradiction that we're talking about pure Kanban, but I'm using blended whiskey. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, so with that, hopefully regular whiskey next time. For my colleague, Prateek Singh, I am Daniel Vacanti. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Drunk Agile, and we will see you in the next episode. Good night, everybody.
Night.